Do you organize NG Asia alone, or you have a team who helps you
Yeah, hello. Nowadays,
alone?
hello. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, we're now live. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to NJ as a meetup. We are excited to have Dmitry Mazhensky with us. Dmitry is a Google developer expert for Angular, Microsoft MVP, and a popular YouTube content creator. He is an expert in web development and has made significant contribution as an instructor and a developer. Today, he will talk about architect of Angular forms. Dmitry will share his deep knowledge and the best practices to help us improve our skills. Please join me in welcoming Dmitry Mazhensky.
Hey, hello everyone. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Ilias, for inviting me and organizing this awesome meetup. Yeah, indeed, I came to you with the topic about internal architecture forms. And yeah, let me probably start sharing my screen. And I will show you more cool things. So let's get started. I'm starting my slides, and could you please confirm that you see the very first slide where is written internal architecture of Angular forms?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see it. Okay, awesome. So as you all already guessed, we'll be talking about the internal architecture of the forms. So we will do quite a deep dive into the source code of how the Angular forms are designed. We will not obviously cover everything because this is too big topic and it's not possible to cover everything in 1 hour. But we will have a look at some certain points. We will see which architectural decision was taken in order to make forms working and how we can benefit from those architectural decisions and how this knowledge might help us to make our forms more flexible, reusable, and so on. Usually, I do this talk offline, and I start usually with a couple of questions, actually very simple ones, and just to warm up. And yeah, the first question, like how many types of forms do we have in Angular? Usually we're raising hands offline, but here, I don't know, probably if someone is watching us, you can drop your answers into the comments. Unfortunately, I don't see them. So Elias, you can help me if some feedback is arrived, but we will not be waiting too much and spend our time. And the question is really very simple. So that's why I give you immediately the answer. We have two types of forms in Angular. Those are template-driven and reactive forms. And the next question that I'm usually asking is, having this context, can you determine with which exactly type of forms you are like currently working, or what is represented, which types of forms here? And yeah, usually again we're raising the hands on the offline meetings, but here I would like to hear your opinions. If someone is watching us again, please drop your comments. If there are no comments yet, Elias, maybe you can answer. What do you think? Which type of forms is here?
Yeah, it's standard forms to creating not reactive one. Okay.
What do you think?
So
What is your guess? Is it reactive forms or template-driven forms? Can you tell it for
yeah,
sure?
it's template driven. I think it's template. Yeah.
Well, I can say the good and bad news for you.
Okay.
So, from one side, you are right, but you are right partially. Actually, the right answer it depends,
Yeah.
because from there is no enough context to understand which type of forms we are talking about. And yeah, since probably I could catch your attention, I would like to introduce myself, which Elias already did actually, but just very quickly. Yeah, my name is Dmytro Mrzhensky, and I'm a creator and author of the YouTube channel Decoded Frontend, and there I publish I try to publish quite unique and in-depth tutorials and cover advanced Angular topics, though not always, sometimes more generic and beginners-friendly topics. But anyway, yeah, you can find a lot of videos where we dive into the source code of the Angular, investigating things, and many other unique things like how to create schematics for your Angular applications, or how to contribute to Angular materials. So very unique content you can find if you scan this QR code below. And yes, I'm a Google developer expert for Angular and also Microsoft MVP. This is something similar like GDE, but from Microsoft. Anyway, yeah, let's continue. And let's get back to our forms. So those models, like form control classes, those are actually core building blocks for all types of forms. So this is something that template-driven and reactive forms utilizing, and we will see in a few minutes how exactly it happens. But before, I would like to discuss a little bit about what the role of those models. So if you take some random simple input elements on your page and have a look at this, you can see that, okay, this input might have or not have some value. It can be valid or invalid. It can be disabled or enabled, right? So it has some certain state. And the goal of the model is to describe the state of the native form control, because Angular doesn't work directly with the native form control. It doesn't mutate its state or something like that, or read the state from there. The source of truth is form control model. This is what describes its state, and this is what Angular uses eventually, and what we use actually when we write the values from our forms. Yeah, and if you worked before with especially reactive forms, it should be very, very familiar for you, because we create instances of these models explicitly, and you're probably familiar with the basic API of this form. So because it describes the state, it gives us also like API in order to read this current state of the form control, like read the value, check if the form control is disabled or enabled, and so on, or subscribe to the value changes. And we also have API that allows to update the state of the form control model. So we can set new value. We can disable or enable the form control model, and so on. And this form control, this is not the only model that is available for us. There are many of them, and all of them, they kind of extend the so-called abstract control. Abstract control, this is the abstract class that actually shares a lot of API among the already derived models like form group and form array. And we will talk about grouping a little bit later in this talk. For now, we are going to focus exclusively to the form control, and we will finish up first with this model. So we have the model. We have the native form controls, right? That these models are describing. Now the question is how we connect native form controls and those models, because on its own models, they are quite useless. You can import them even without importing any forms model or reactive forms model. You can just import the class, instantiate it, change the state, but it is quite useless because it is not connected with the native controls. So that's why in Angular, directives are used in order to connect some certain model with certain native control, right? And which actually directives do we have in order to achieve this goal? And we have the following three directives, two of them reserved for reactive forms and one for the template-driven forms. And let's go one by one through them. So form control allows you to connect the standalone form controls. Here, please don't confuse with the standalone components. This is different concepts. Standalone form control means the form control that exists outside of any form. A good example would be like a global search in your web application that you usually have somewhere in the header of your app. So this is standalone form control, and form control directive allows you to bind model instance with such a standalone input. And the form control name directive, this is the also reactive forms directive that allows you to bind the model with or a control that belongs to some certain form. Here on the slide, I don't have the full code, but who worked with reactive forms, you know that you create form group first, and then inside the form control, and then you use form control name directive in order to match the keys defined in the directive and key from the form group model. But then we have also template-driven forms. And here you can see it seems like much easier. We have only one directive in gmodel, and it takes as a value some property, right? Some class property, as you can see. And then it uses some magic, I call it magic two-way data binding in order to synchronize values. And here you reasonably might raise a question like, okay, but Dmitro, you mentioned that form control, those models, they are like shared between two types of forms, but we don't see anything like that in the template-driven forms. However, if you have a look at the source code of the ng model, you will see the following string, where ng model directive explicitly creates the form control instance. So under the hood, it happens automatically. We don't do that manually, unlike with reactive forms, where we create them explicitly. Here, everything happens automatically under the hood. And yeah, at this point, you might say that, okay, good to know, but what I can get from it, how I can benefit from this knowledge. Probably you heard a statement like, if you want to reactively track changes of your control, for form control, you have to use reactive forms, because there we have value changes property, you can subscribe to it, and so on. Yeah, we have seen it a few slides ago. But actually, nothing stops you to inject the ng model. And if you remember, we have control property inside the ng model, and it has an instance of the corresponding form control. So we can inject this directive, we can access this control, and this is the same like model form control as you use for reactive forms. So it has the same API, and you can subscribe to status changes or values changes and perform some logic. For example, this code snippet demonstrates the use case when you have some control status tracker directive that is being attached to your form control, and it tracks if the status is changed to invalid, for example. And if it is invalid, inside the subscribe, you would probably create the component with error, which renders error messages that currently has this input. So, something like that. Yeah, this is just for demo purposes, but I hope you got the idea. So this is how you can benefit from the knowledge, from the previous knowledge. And now let's move forward and talk a little bit about the state synchronization, because our model has to be always in sync with the native control. So if user types a new value into the input, our model has to be updated. If we programmatically update our model from the code, the native control has to be updated accordingly, right? And reflect the current value or current state, like disabled, enabled, and so on. And here things become very interesting and a little bit sophisticated, but I hope I will be able to deliver the information pretty clear way. So if you have a look in some, for example, Angular DevTools or other debugging, or if you use any other debugging tools for Angular, you might notice that despite you apply only one directive to the native input, like form control in my case, despite we have only one directive applied explicitly, in fact, there are three directives reside on this node: the default value accessor, ng control status directive, and form control directive. This is exactly what the one we explicitly apply. This is very interesting, yeah, very not so obvious thing. And the interesting part is actually this default value accessor. And before you go investigate what the heck is the value accessor, you would probably do something the same also for another type of the input. Yeah, for example, you could investigate the input with the type checkbox, not like a text like in the previous example. And there you might notice that we have a similar picture, but there is one difference. Instead default value accessor, we have now checkbox control value accessor. And actually, if you try to play around with that and check different other types, you will see that for different types, you will most probably use different type of value accessor. So what is the value accessor? What is which role it plays? And the value accessor, it plays a key role in the control state sync. This is the guy who can work with models and some concrete type of the native form control. Now I think it would make sense to talk a bit about some technical details of the value accessor, what it needs to have in order to be proper value accessor. So every ng value accessor has to have a corresponding provider where you have to provide ng value accessor token. And the instance of this token must be some class instance that has a certain set of methods that will help this directive or component behave as a native form control. And to know which exactly methods you have to implement, you have this class. It has implement the interface control value accessor, which some of you probably know. Everyone who developed some custom form controls probably did something similar. So there we have 3 required methods and 1 optional one. So write value, register on change, register on touched, and set disabled state. They are pretty much descriptive, but let's have a look at some of them. And what is special there in those methods is that in these methods, you contain the logic that knows how to work with a concrete native form control. For example, if we are talking about default value accessor, then it means that we work with the input with a type text, right? So it's a regular input element. In this case, in order to update the value, in order to update the value of the native element, we have to take the native element and update property value with the new one that we receive from the model. And write value, this is the method that will be called when the model value changes, and it has to be reflected on the view side. And this method exactly knows how to do that. In our case, it does it with this single simple line. But if we work with the checkbox, for example, the implementation would be slightly different, because the input with the type checkbox, it has slightly different API. It doesn't have already a value, so it might have probably, but in order to display the check for the checkbox, we have to set the checked property to true or false. So it is completely different API, and that's why we have to have many value accessors that are compatible with many different types of the native controls. And now let's have a look how it happens, like under the hood, how the value accessor is being connected into this whole system of the synchronization. And it happens the following way. So the form control directive, or ng model directive, or form control name directive, they all have the same pretty much logic. So they just inject the value accessor that resides on the same node. And it does it using the ng value accessor token that we already saw, that has to be provided for every value accessor. And once we get a reference to the value accessor, there inside ng on changes lifecycle hook somewhere, or yeah, I think in ng on changes, they're called the setup control function, and it provides the corresponding model, and it provides also the instance of this directive that has reference to the value accessor. And most of the magic happens inside this setup control. This is where this binding happens between the model and the native control. For example, if we have a look at this function, immediately we can see that we call the write value method that I already mentioned in the previous slides. We call this method of the value accessor, and we immediately provide value from the model. And in such a way, we perform the initial synchronization of the model and the view side, some native control. And after that, we check if the model has disabled state. So if it is disabled, then we again call the set disabled state of the value accessor, and this method supposed to know how to lock the control, how to lock the native control, how to prevent the user interaction with this element. So if we are talking about some input or as a select from control, then it will be just get disabled state, and you can do actually nothing with this element yet. So you cannot eventually change the value of the model. And after that, once we perform that logic, there happens call of four functions. Here they have names like change pipelines. I treat them as listeners. For me, like it's easier to understand. So like for me, this mental model would be easier, but this is not the same as a like JavaScript event listeners or Angular. Like, yeah, it's a different thing. But we can have a look what is happening there, because they actually play the role of this synchronization. This is where the synchronizations between model and the input is happening, because the value might change in the future at some point in time. So we can have a look, for example, to the first listener, setup view change pipeline. And you can see here quite a simple piece of code. We call the register on change method of our value accessor, and we provide as an argument the following function that takes some new value, and inside the body of this function, it takes this new value and set this new value as the value of the control. And this control, this is the actually corresponding model, right? So here you can see new value is set up. We also set up the dirty stage. If you also worked with Angular forms, you should know what means dirty state. This is when the value of the form has been changed. You can see currently it's pending, but it's just treat it as if it just updates the directly value. This is it is quite hard to explain right now without dedicated slides, so I will just skip it. Just think about it as if updated value just like that. Yeah, then this function, it goes actually to the register on change method of our value accessors. So if you have ever implemented your own component that has to be a control value accessor, you probably like did it just simply like taking some magic function, you assign it to some property, and then you just call when the value has been changed. But now you know what this function is and where it comes from. Because I personally, I used quite long time this approach. I implemented many value accessors, and I didn't even think what is inside that function. This is only when I started to creating videos and things like that, then I had to investigate things more and figure it out how it actually works. I was like, wow, this is where this magic comes from. So yeah, this is how value accessor works. And again, the question, what you can get from this knowledge. And partially, I already answered this question. Value accessors allow you to first synchronize your models and native controls, and also it allows you to create non-standard controls, something like rating pickers, some other fancy sliders, things like that. And yeah, component which implements properly control value accessor immediately gets support also of things like validation. You can apply validators to these non-standard controls and so on. It will be just working. Now, let's quickly talk about control grouping. I already mentioned this part at the very beginning. And we will talk about the remaining two forms. Actually, there are three remaining forms. There is also a form record, but form record, it is from the functional point of view, it's the same as a form group. It needs just for typings for the dynamic forms when you add dynamically controls to the group of the controls, and you want to have proper typings, then you use form record. But because I had lack of space, I decided to keep only form group and form array. So those models, they just group single controls, like our form controls, into some data structures. Form group combines everything in one object, and form array combines everything in array, because sometimes it is much easier to combine data in array, because sometimes we have open-ended list, means that we don't know how many elements or controls will be there, and yeah, with these data structures, very easy to work as with an array. So grouping, we have models, and we have to connect somehow these models. And here, everything works pretty much the same as with form controls we saw. So for that, we use also directives. And depending on the form of the directive, we use different directives for that. For the reactive forms, we have three directives that can help us to map groups. This is the form group directive, this is the form group name, and form array name. And for the template-driven forms, we have ng form directive, and we have ng model group. And by the way, in the template-driven forms, ng form is not necessary to add it explicitly. It will be added automatically once you import forms module, but I just added this to be more explicit. So yeah, 5 directives that are responsible for grouping, but we can split those groups into two forms, into two groups, sorry. So we have root form groups. Those form groups, they are representing the root form. Yeah, so for reactive forms, we use the form group directive, and for template driven, this is ng form. These can be only one root group because it represents the whole form. Yeah, that's why it's only one. Those directives, they know about the submission state. So they have a property submitted, which might be true or false. And those directives, they also provide you the way to properly reset your forms. About resetting in a few minutes. Regarding the nested groups, we have the following situation. So first of all, those are nested groups. Those are groups that exist inside root groups. So this is if you want to group some related controls like address, whatever. And for reactive forms, you use the form group name directive, and also form array name directive, if you use the form array model for that, of course. And for the template-driven forms, we have only one type of directive. It's an ng model group, and it doesn't have ng model array. Why? To be honest, I don't know. but the fact is that for template-driven forms, they don't exist. And yeah, you can have as many nested groups as you need. It depends on your use case. What do we get from the knowledge I mentioned before? Well, remember I mentioned about form resetting. So root groups, they allow you to properly reset forms. And while for template-driven forms, it is usually not the case. I mean, it's obvious because you don't have like any other API, but in reactive forms, when you use reactive forms, very often developers call reset method of the model, of the form group model. And it works, but not always the way as you expect. For example, if you call reset method on the model class, then you reset only models, but you don't reset the submitted state, and it might cause some unwanted behaviors, like you might see remaining error message, validation error messages, and so on, because sometimes you have the condition that you display some certain message, error message, in case if the form is submitted and I don't know, into control touched or something like that. And if you don't properly reset the submitted state of the form, you might have these use cases where you get the behavior you don't actually want. And we are coming already to the end. And the last topic for today, the last but not least, is the useful abstractions. So remember, at the beginning, I showed you example like that we can inject the ng model directive and subscribe to value changes or status changes, whatever. It works, but this solution has a limitation, and it works only with one type of form. Namely, in our case, the code here works only with template-driven forms. That's bad, especially if you design something generic. I don't know, maybe some directive for your library that's supposed to use different developers, and you don't know if it will be applied to the template-driven and reactive forms. So you have to have something generic. And your colleague might come and say that, okay, I want to support reactive forms. You say, okay, I will use form control directive for that. I will check this one. But this will break your compatibility with template-driven forms. And we have also for reactive forms, if you remember, two different directives, how to connect models with native controls. So we have three different types, and yeah, and we have to find a way how to write our code the way that will be compatible with all directives. For that, we have to dive into the implementation details of those three directives. And this is just small pieces of the source code for those three directives. And here you can see the first common thing they all extend ng control base class. From there, they inherit a lot of shared API and some logic. And another thing that is quite interesting, they all have some certain providers. Like you can see the form control binding, control name binding, and form control binding again. If you have a look at what is inside, you will see the following construction. You have an object where you provide the ng control token, and then it resolves to existing ng model for the ng model directive. For the form control name directive, it will resolve to existing form control name directive instance, and so on. It means that we can solve our issue and make our code more generic if we inject ng control instead of the concrete implementation of the directive. So ng control, this is abstraction that sits in front of the concrete implementation of the directive, and at runtime via dependency injection, it already resolved to some concrete implementation of the directive. And because those directives, they inherit the same base class, they have the same API, it is safe to work with them, because it doesn't matter if I inject eventually ng model or will be injected form control name directive. I know that they all have the control property, and the instance of the control property will be some model that extends the abstract class and has all these status changes properties and so on. So in this case, we can make our code much more generic and more flexible. But what about control groups? Here we have the same situation, yeah, because we inject form control, but we also want to do similar things for groups, because many use cases might be if why would we need to have this functionality, similar functionality? But anyway, here we have the similar situation. We have the base class that those directives are extending. As you remember, we have 5 directives, but I just didn't have a place on the slides, but there you will see pretty much the same story. So what we can see, they extend also control container base class, and they also have providers. And inside the providers, we can see the similar story, similar providers that are being resolved the similar way, which means that likewise we did with the ng control, we can inject also control containers. And we can make our control status tracker directive more like more advanced, and it can also support the status tracking for groups. So we can apply it to the form array, form name array directive, it will be working. We can apply it to the form group name, it will be working, and any other directive. One of these 5 you have seen on the previous slides. With all of them, our code will be compatible. Ideally, in reality, you sometimes encounter the situations when not everything works as you expect, not so smooth as it is on the slides, but actually it should be like that. And this was everything. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope it was interesting and you could
Yeah,
something new.
it's impressive. We have some question from users. Okay. The first question is, in a large application with multiple complex forms, how do you manage the state of each forms effectively? And the next question from Alisher is, what are the strategies and the tools you use for unit testing and end-to-end testing of Angular forms? How do you ensure that all forms interaction and validation are properly tested?
Well, about testing, about end-to-end tests, I cannot say too much. To be fairly speaking, I didn't in all our companies, we had end-to-end tests written by separate department, QA department. They did it. So there I don't have too much experience. But with unit tests, well, I do approach them something like a test host strategy or something similar, where also involved templates. Because I know that there is approach also you are testing only their models and checking if the model changes. But I, to be honest, don't find this very effective, because we lose a lot of use cases uncovered. For example, if your control is invalid, like it might be invalid, but it doesn't guarantee that user sees the error message or anything like that. So that's why I choose the strategy that involves the template, and my validation of the test case is if some certain element or error message or whatever you test appeared on the screen. But this is the very generic answer. Usually everything comes to like the proper answer. For the proper answer, you need to see like you need more context, and you have to see the actual code, and you need more information to give more accurate answer.
Yeah, okay. Okay. What about the first question? And about
First
this,
question, could you please remind me something about the state?
yeah, for form state management. In a large application with multiple complex forms, how do you manage the state of each form effectively?
I'm not sure I understand the
question.
I mean, I understand the question, but I don't understand what exactly the what exactly meant by effectively managing this state. So the question is that something like, should we use something like Redux forms or something to have the state, or what
Yeah,
exactly here is?
maybe it's a different user session or navigation, the between the states.
Well, between sessions, you could serialize your state and store it somewhere on the local storage, for example, and then just deserialize and restore the state and update it when you bootstrap the form. So when you create the form, you can store your last value of the form somewhere on the local storage, then just set up initial values, or you could use store it persistently on the server as a some config, right? So JSON config, and then dynamically recreate the form based on this config. But yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's hard
Okay.
to tell something exact, especially when it comes to complex forms, as it was in the question, because complex forms, this is not easy topic at all. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
there
I
are
know.
so many nuances, so many little things that you have to.
Maybe affected to the wolf. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you, Dimitro, for a great presentation on Angular forms. Your clear explanation have helped us to understand how to build and manage the forms better.
I hope
Thanks
so.
to all attendees for your participation in the questions. We hope you found this session helpful for your future projects. Stay connected with our NG Asia community for more events. Share your feedbacks and suggestions with us. Thank you again, Dimitro, for sharing
you.
your knowledge. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I finished streaming.